problem with how you do things at home, family, cultural things here and there that you don't agree with. Eh, di ba adult ka na? How do you respond? Let's talk about that. Welcome to YA Talks. This is the podcast where we talk about everything you need to know about the adulting life and walking in Christ. Once again, I am JP Kabuhat. I am your host, but also I am the young adult pastor here in Green Hills Christian Fellowship. This podcast, while we stream it live, it will also be available on demand in YouTube and in Facebook. Today, we will be talking about family cultures. Now, if you're a Christian, if you're a Filipino even, you know that honoring your parents or respecting them is perhaps one of the main family rule in your family. Ako ang nanay, ako ang tatay, anak ka lang, susunod ka. But of course, you are now at a stage in every way possible, you're already an adult. Meaning, you are capable of making decisions personally, relationally, financially, professionally, and even spiritually or any other facet whatsoever. But yet, it seems like you're still treated as forever like a child to your parents. Somehow you feel like you are not independent enough, that you need the approval of your parents still in many things even today. Thus, we have a discussion about family cultures because there are family cultures that you cannot seem to shake off. Kunyari, utang na loob, pinaaral kita, kailangan mong magsumuporta sa amin. And not that providing for your parents is a bad thing. It's actually very commendable. But sometimes when it's demanded, that's where the friction begins. And there could be many more cultural things that is coming into your thoughts at this point. And maybe we can talk about that in a bit. Kaya kailangan natin magkaroon ng discussion about this. Adulting, family cultures, how do you respond to it as a young adult? How can you be like Christ also in your response to them, especially when you no longer agree with a few things? So we invited an expert who can help clarify a few things about how to be a young adult Christian in view of family cultures. Let me introduce her. She is a professorial lecturer of family life and child development in the University of the Philippines. She earned her PhD in clinical psychology in the University of the Philippines and took her Master's of Arts in Development Studies major in Women in Development in the Institute of Social Studies, Netherlands. Mother of 3 adults and a grandmother to 6, let us all give a warm welcome to Dr. Yoyet Roldan. Hello, Doctora.
Hello.
Welcome.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me here.
The pleasure po is ours. And by the way, guys, we welcome her again because last season, she was with us. She talked with us about how to honor your parents as a young adult. It's something very related to our topic today. So if you guys are interested about that topic, we place that also in the description of our stream today in our post. So we place the link to that episode in the description box and you can always view that after the stream. But today we'll be talking about family cultures. Now, Doctora, you are now a grandmother, even of a teenager whom I saw in Youth Live the other day. Your years, not just as a counseling professional, but also as a parent, make us interested about your perspective or what you have to say when it comes to family culture. But let me first ask you something about your family. Is there a particular family culture and mind, top of mind na lang po, that you think is very real or pronounced sa pamilya po ninyo?
I it's really hard to identify that it is culture.
Of course. Opo.
But culture and values are inseparable.
Mm-hmm.
So in our family, we value education very much.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's important for the work of the mind is very important to us.
Mm-hmm.
But on top of that, how the heart factors into that mind too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so education. is a value that, of course, if you really dig it, becomes a culture. We will be talking about in a bit. And since you mentioned that po na lang, let's start po, Doctora, with definition of terms. So
Okay.
what is family culture to begin with?
All right. Usually, the traditional way of doing it is that these are traditional beliefs or traditional practices, ideas that have that has a lot or important values attached to them. They include symbols and meanings, and usually they're passed from one generation to another.
Okay.
So, for example, if your family is a family of, academicians, most of the time it will move towards academics. Or if your family is a family of maybe fisher folks, and so that's carried on from generation to generation.
So you mentioned the idea that it comes across generation because it comes from a shared value that get passed on over and over again. And of course, it varies po, di ba? Family structure varies.
Yeah. Cultures, I think we somehow share values as Filipinos on what is important in our families. But beyond that, individual families would also have their own culture. So you'd realize that one family is different from yours, even if you're both Filipino families.
Opo. And that being said, the differences perhaps from that certain family and your family will contribute to you now as a young adult, observing many of your friends and all. And you might be thinking that why are they doing things here and they're not doing it here? And why are we doing things here that they are doing differently? Which, as a young adult now, you can respond to the differences, respond to the different perspectives, and there are things already that your family is doing that you no longer agree with. So,
Yeah.
in a practical sense, Doctora, what do we do now when we do not agree with a certain culture that our household has accepted as the norm?
I think first, Pastor JP, I think we have to realize as young adults that we start questioning this culture thing when we become young adults, or maybe when we become teenagers, because we have a new awareness of what is possible. What is possible and what's wrong with our practices, or how can I can do better,
Yes.
And so when you are a child, you grow up getting that culture or
Yeah.
acquiring that culture, or how your parents want you to behave, how your parents want you to think, how your parents would like you to, your attitude towards things.
Yes.
But when you become a teenager or a young adult, you start, but as a teenager, you still go with it.
Yeah.
But as a young adult, then you start questioning it.
Yeah.
And actually, when I think about it, this is the time to start your own family and have your
Yes.
own culture.
Correct.
Because that is the culture of your parents. And that if you really want to have a different culture, or maybe you'll start a different thing, then you start your own family and start your own.
That's like
Yeah.
the best solution there.
Yeah,
Okay.
and in fact, it's a new beginning when you have a family. You'll say, I'll do this, I'll pursue what we have practiced, but this thing I will discard,
Yes,
So you
opo.
discard what you don't like, and then you start your own culture.
Right, but if you exist in a household still, and of course since wala pang partner, how do you respond to the differences of perspective there? Or if you want to be practical, when what do we do when we do not agree with a certain way of things done at home?
Parents are parents, and that is their family, right? If you don't want to follow the culture that they have been used to, they're not young, You cannot change this whole thing in the middle, in midstream, because they're growing old, and this is what they're used to, and this is what they want. So what happens is you have to learn how to adjust to it.
Correct.
And then you bring in the issue of, then am I dishonoring my parent if I don't follow what they want? And so that's when honoring comes in. That's where traditions come in, and then you question those things. But I think those values and those practices could be talked about.
Okay.
especially if you want something else.
All right. But on the practical sense now, Doctora, like, what are some of the things you want to do? Do we sit down with them? Do we sort out? Do we talk with them? Do we
You
clarify
said
with
it. You
them?
said it.
Okay.
Definitely. If there's a value or there's a practice that is so important to you, you don't discuss it while just eating or casually. What you do is try to make a special date or appointment with your parents, and then maybe treat them out, and then tell them there's something very important to me and I
Okay.
want to discuss this with you. And that is also honoring them, wanting to listen to what they think and why you actually think that way about that value. And so I think important is for them to realize that you're listening, but it's also important for you to express your thoughts about it or your acts about it.
Okay. So, in the process of sorting out, say for example, all right, they agree to talk, they agree to have dinner or lunch somewhere to talk about what, you know, goals or values you don't agree with anymore, or how do you what are some of the advices we can give them on how to communicate properly? Or of course, good communication is very important at that point, right? So, what are the practical steps we can give our audiences, assuming that, of course, there are things already that they don't agree with and they want to talk about? How do they communicate properly?
Yes. First and foremost is you show them how you value them. So valuing your parents and appreciating how they brought you up, I think is important, because just discarding everything is just like, discarding them too, because that's part of how they brought you up. So it's important for you to value that concern, whatever concern you have or whatever concern they have, and then try to step back and try to not to, for example, if they're demanding something, you don't try to attack them. Step back and look at where they're coming from and listen to them. And then with that, I think if you have some angst, usually young adults have lots of angst about future and about what they want to do in life. You talk about your own anxieties in life. I think their hearts will soften if they see that you have your own concerns too. You don't have to be confrontational about it. You talk about what's in your heart and your concerns, and I think that will soften their hearts.
Okay. So when you value their concern or valuing concerns and you want to step back, not meet head on, you want to say and mean what you say with respect, set aside a special time was the homework that you mentioned a while ago, and also open up your feelings about what you just said. And again, when we meet with them, when we talk with them and clarify the goals, or is the goal that we want to convince them? What if a certain culture, and I'm already remembering a few people in my growth group that have a lot of culture in their families that it seems so very institutional that they cannot do anything about it. Is the goal of the conversation to change, to make them agree, or is the goal is to find a way to meet in the middle? Nasaan po ba yung goal natin in that conversation?
I think beyond meeting in the middle, because sometimes it's difficult to find the middle.
Yes.
It's usually you want to keep your side of it, and then the parents would like to keep their side of it, of an issue. I think listening is it's a simple word, but it's very vital. And then the manner by which we communicate is also very important. So in general, honoring is really an attitude of the heart. It's not necessarily to please them with your decisions, because there are some children who are very good at pleasing their parents
Yes.
in front, but at the back they'll do something else.
Yeah.
You know? And so I think that is not honoring our parents.
Okay.
Honoring our parents is actually doing what is in our heart, and then communicating it in an honest and polite way. And then so you may say, this might not be pleasing to you,
Mm-hmm.
but this is how I feel about it. And then that's honoring because
Mm-hmm.
you are honest about it rather than do something else when
Correct.
their
Yeah.
back is turned on you.
Mm-hmm. And it's good that, Doctora, you differentiated pleasing and honoring
Yes.
our parents, because in the process of honoring, as what you mentioned, you may not always please them.
Or you
And
may be pleasing them but not
not
necessarily honoring them
correct.
too.
So hindi siya pareho, hindi siya automatic na the same. And in the process of this planning for this conversation, one of the questions that came out was, how can I know if a certain value in our family or if a certain culture in our family is biblical or not?
Oh. I think when you start think, asking about biblicality of things,
Mm-hmm.
I think you start to want to be dogmatic about things.
Yeah.
So when you talk about is it biblical or not, then there's a dogma that comes in. You
Mm-hmm.
see, that's not biblical.
Yeah.
It's just like, I remember the message of Pastor Larry last time. You should obey me because the Bible says you should obey me. So that's a dogma, like obey me. But beyond that, there's a bigger picture of being subject to one another, being humble. There's this big thing about bigger values that our Lord is teaching us. And so when you start to want to look for what is biblical or unbiblical, I think you
Yeah.
want to come up with something very strong just to get your point, just to get your way.
Yeah, and I agree with there, kasi harping back on what P. Larry said in the sermon that you could also watch, that you don't demand submission, especially the conversation last week when it comes to honoring, when it comes to when Paul was talking to the wives, you don't demand them to submit. It's not that way because the Bible says so. And parang ganun rin po yung sinasabi ni Doktora. It's like, when you have a polemic tone, there's something more to it. Like when you say, how can I know if a certain value is biblical or not? 'Di ba, Dok? Parang merong something in it na more than actually the question. So, is it suffice it to say, when we answer such a question, how can I know if a certain value is biblical or not? Yung parang advice that we would give is to more of, teka lang, saan ka ba nanggagaling when you ask a question like this?
Yes, and I always go back to how Jesus deal with things. He would deal with where people are coming from rather than come up with that's
Yeah.
not biblical or that
All
is
right.
biblical, because the Pharisees are very good at it. What is biblical
Correct.
and what is not biblical.
Correct.
But I think people connect, you connect with people, what is really in their hearts and what is important to them. And that's how love is. You
Yes.
want to know, that's the exercise of love.
Yeah, and that was also connected to what you mentioned a while ago, that when you want to manage a conflict, especially with your parents, it's really more of being willing to listen as well. You value the concern as you want them to also value your concern, and not really on a conversation of who is more biblical in their stance or not. It's like it's regarding issues at home. We also received another question, and it goes like this: how should I respond if, quote unquote, utang na loob and, quote unquote, children as insurance, these values run deep in my family?
Thank you for that's actually one of the more common thing that comes out. And what comes to mind is that this kind of issue is brought about by parents who are really kind of in need. You will not hear this from parents who are rich.
Yeah.
Because the rich parents would actually give money or leave a big sum to their children. So they will not talk about utang na loob. But when you talk about parents who are not sure about their future, or they have 10 more children to bring to school, to take
Yeah.
to school.
Opo.
So you will think about needs. And
Yeah.
so this is the thing that you sit down with your parents with and where they are coming from. And also talk about your own concern and your own future, that you're not getting any younger,
Yeah.
you want to get married soon, and so
Right.
on and so forth. So this is where you see different realities across families. So you cannot just say the utang na loob is all over. You know, it's not present in all families, but I think it's a concern, particularly of insecurity of future, or insecurity and like the limited income that they get, because you are a young adult, you're getting your salary every month.
Yeah.
And here I am, I finished all my pension already.
Okay.
And then there's nothing to get anymore. So there's that kind of concern.
Okay. So for the young adults here, well, there's no shortcut out of this one. If you can see a repeated theme here, you have to communicate. Kailangan talagang makipag-usap, especially sa parents ninyo, if there are things, especially like this, that you don't agree with. Kasi you will have to decide on a certain kind of boundary. You have to talk about bakit ako where am I coming from, where they're coming from, and yeah, hindi pwedeng iwasan yung idea ng conversation eh. Speaking of another issue that needs conversation, another question po sinubmit. And ito, very relevant naman to in other people that I know. How do I deal with family traditions that prohibit relationships with others? Like, same culture only, same, dapat pareho lang natin ng lahi. Ganyan.
Yes, I think that's so real. That's so real, especially in closed cultures.
Yeah.
And so I think biblically, when you talk about Bible injunctions, first, she must be or he must be a Christian, right? So we don't get unequally yoked with unbelievers. So actually things get easier when you are into a Christian family. So that's the first, that make sure that he is a Christian or she is a Christian. And then, since this is your new family, you want to start your own culture. Again, talking to your parents that you are not trying to displease them. You want to honor them. But this is where your heart is going.
Yeah.
You know, the importance
Opo.
of going with the person you love. You have prayed hard about it. You could talk about how you prayed so much for it and hard about it. And that what is important to you are Christian values and so on. So I think you could just move on.
Yes.
I don't think you have to get stuck with. I just think you don't have to get stuck with that closed culture.
Okay, you don't have to get stuck with that closed culture. You're a young adult already. As long as they're Christians, you both are Christians, then you don't have to get stuck with that closed culture. Maraming magsisave po nung quote na yon.
I'm sorry, I'm not God, but I really think that you have to pray hard about it. But I think it's not part of honoring your parents because, you know, it's part of pleasing them.
Yes. Magkaiba ang pleasing at honoring parents. Say it louder to the people at the back. How about another question was sent when it comes to honoring and pleasing parents. And it goes like this. Am I required to stay with my parents / guardians until I get married? Or when is the proper time to move out and live independently? Because if I could remember my lola, I mean, I agree with the one who sent the question. I mean, agree with the heart of it. Because I remember when I moved out from our household and I wasn't married yet, my lola felt like I don't want it there because what's my point in moving out? But it's really just so that I could be closer to the office. But there are culture like this, that if you leave the household, you don't like us. How do you deal with this?
Actually, you are more, you really have more options now. During my time, you can only leave your family when you get married.
No.
So
Wow.
everybody, they all marry early because
Ah.
that's the only way you can leave your family. Because leaving your family is like abandoning your parents,
Ah.
and and they will think just when you have your own work, you leave
Mm.
us because you could be on your own, and then you
Yeah.
leave us.
Ah, okay.
So there's that thinking. But right now, I think they're more open. It's more open
Mm.
for people to have options of living in another place, and you don't
Mm.
have to get married to live. I think if that wasn't my option, I could may not have married early.
Oh.
So I just would just like to tell the audience that I had my own struggles when I was young, that I
Mm.
can only live when I get married. That's why maybe I got married early. But it's
Earlier.
good. Now I have a lot of apos.
Yes.
So it's
Okay.
nice to marry early and have apos while you're still young.
Okay. And what this question reminds me again is the importance to communicate that you're not abandoning. It's different today that there are many practical reasons for moving out, especially pag may traffic at mahalang gasolina, when you're just going to walk to the office and save money in the process, then it's not an abandonment. So again, there's no shortcut to this. You have to communicate with your folks, with your parents about why you do what you do and a certain culture that is no longer applicable that they are projecting on
And it's
to
good
you.
to go home once in a while, like once a week or once a month. And just don't forget all about them.
Yes.
Because sometimes you leave and then you never go back.
Mm.
And I think it's
Mm-mm.
important also to continue remembering them and be thoughtful and remember the birthdays and attend the celebrations.
Yes. And given that now that we all understood from what you said that eto pala yung perspective nila, they would feel abandoned pala, then all the more that every young adult that decides to move out, find a way ever so often, weekly or as much as you could, makabisita sa magulang, makabisita sa lola, maalala yung birthday, maalala yung anniversary, and so on and so forth. Because may pinanggagalingan silang culture of abandonment pala. That's like a very timely reminder for all of us that are values behind culture that we should be concerned about. Doktora, there will be many more conversations perhaps that we can do with the people sa Zoom later. So we can keep talking about it. Kung gusto niyo po mag-attend sa Zoom call afterwards, we will be there to converse with you if there are more questions. The young adult team would be there to entertain or perhaps just debrief, or if you just want to meet other people as well from the young adults, we will be there. Doktora, with regards to the topic, can you give us your final words about it?
Oh, thank you. First, before I give my final words, I would just like to thank you all for considering your parents at this time in your life. Thank you all for wanting to honor your parents. And I really appreciate that this is part of YA Talks. And I think this is actually glorifying the Lord, and thank you very much. And I understand your struggle and wanting to please your parents actually, and at the same time attending to your personal goals and concerns. And so as Pastor JP said a while ago, the importance of communicating. It all starts with really having not just for your concerns, but regularly cultivating your relationship with your parents so that communication is not really just out there. It's a regular part of your daily life, communicating and having and building a good relationship with your parents. And also in that communication, share your personal angst, your personal concerns, your personal goals, so that they know where you're going and what you want to happen in your life. And I think maybe very helpful for yourself would be balancing your planning and your dreaming of your life with diligence in your work. You could just go on and on with dreaming and planning, but the day-to-day diligence and the day-to-day faithfulness and obedience in your walk with the Lord is very important. Nothing is left unnoticed when it comes to our God. So he knows how he will bless you, whether no one is looking, whether somebody is looking. Anytime he knows how you are investing into his kingdom and how you want to please him with your life. So I think that is such a guarantee that God will bless you and your plans if you will walk faithfully to him. And of course, this is a reminder that in each step of the way in our life, up to now with my life, having faith in God is God glorifying, trusting him for your future and for your life. Thank you.
And with that, it's a wrap. Thank you so much, Doctora, and thank you all for joining us in our family discussions for the past few weeks. We will end next week with another discussion about family matters as well. But this wraps up our discussion on family culture. So it's a broad topic, right? And we can continue up to talking about it. We don't have to be limited with this call. We only asked 3 questions, but you might have more. So again, join us in our Zoom call later after talks. You can just click on this scan this QR code, and you will be directed to the Zoom call where we will be in a bit to converse and meet you guys. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube and Facebook. Hit that notification icon so you'll be reminded every time we have a new episode. Once again, I'm Pastor JP Kabuhat, and this is Why I Talk. See you again next week. Bye.